My manager tried to sabotage my presentation, so I turned the tables. I knew the day I walked into the office that my career was teetering on the edge of either spectacular success or absolute disaster. And no, I'm not exaggerating. I work at one of those mid-sized tech firms where the coffee is decent, the Wi-Fi is faster than my social life, and office politics is basically a full-time sport. Everyone has their eyes on the ladder, but very few remember to climb it with both hands. Some prefer to trip you while you're halfway up. Enter my manager, Daniel. First impressions, smooth, polished. The kind of guy who could sell sand to a desert nomad and leave them thanking him. Daniel had this smile that made you want to believe in humanity again. But the second you looked away, he was subtly cutting you down in ways so sly that if you tried to call him out, you'd sound paranoid. I'd heard the stories. People whispering about past employees who mysteriously got negative reviews, missed promotions, or in one legendary case, were blamed for a client presentation that went off the rails. Naturally, I tried to keep my distance, but when you share a workspace, there's no escaping him. That Monday morning, my inbox pinged with a message titled, "Big Opportunity, Client Presentation." My heart sank a little, but also, let's be honest, my stomach did a weird little flip of excitement. The email wasn't from my manager directly, but it was clearly routed through him with his cryptic note. "You've been chosen to lead tomorrow's presentation. Make sure it's flawless. No mistakes." I blinked at the screen. Flawless. No mistakes. Those are the words that echo in your head when you know your manager is basically handing you a landmine disguised as a gift. I spent the next hour obsessively checking the data, rehearsing slides, and double-checking every figure in my report. Everything looked perfect, until Daniel strolled over with that infuriating, casual smile. He leaned against my cubicle, arms crossed, and said, "You know, I went through your draft. Some of these numbers don't match the latest client report. Could be fine, but, double check." I froze. I had checked the numbers at least 5 times. "Oh, thanks, Daniel. I'll re-verify them," I said, forcing a confident smile. He nodded, satisfied, and walked away. But the lingering feeling in my gut told me that wasn't just concern. It was a warning. He wasn't helping, he was testing me. Or worse, planting doubt in my head. I sighed, tapped my pen against the desk, and decided I'd triple check everything. Better safe than ruined in front of the client. As the day wore on, I noticed little things. Daniel dropping comments in meetings like, "Are you sure that approach will impress the execs?" Or subtly questioning my workflow in front of the team. Nothing overt, nothing that could be pinned on him, but enough to make me second guess every decision. I started noticing patterns. Every time I made a small success, he'd cast a shadow over it. If I sent a report with correct numbers, he'd casually mention an alternative calculation method I hadn't used, just enough to make the executives think twice. I went home that evening, trying not to spiral into full-blown paranoia, but the more I replayed the day in my head, the more I realized Daniel wasn't just cautious. He was actively trying to undermine me. It wasn't maliciously loud or obvious. It was refined, manipulative, and almost artistic in its subtlety. And the worst part, I had no proof. Not yet. The next morning, I arrived early. My cubicle was a mess of printed spreadsheets, color-coded slides, and sticky notes with reminders I didn't even know I'd written. Coffee in hand, I mentally rehearsed my opening line. "Good morning, everyone. Today, I'll walk you through." I smiled to myself, a little nervous but determined. I wasn't going to let Daniel or anyone else derail me. And then he appeared. Daniel, freshly pressed shirt, polished shoes, and that infuriating grin. "Morning. Heard you're taking the lead today. Excited?" His tone was cheerful, almost too cheerful. I nodded, trying to return the energy without showing the tiniest flicker of anxiety. "Just, make sure the data aligns with the client's internal report," he added casually, as if it were advice from a friend, but I knew better. He wasn't friendly. Friendly doesn't whisper doubt like a serpent. I spent the next 2 hours triple-checking everything, double-checking slide transitions, rehearsing my speech in front of my reflection in the office window. Every detail mattered. Every number, chart, and bullet point had to be flawless. Daniel wandered by a couple of times, making small talk, always with a side-eye glance that felt like he was measuring my stress levels. By mid-afternoon, the tension was thick. My team tried to offer support, but even they seemed wary. They'd seen Daniel's manipulations before. One of my colleagues, Jenna, whispered, "If he's smiling like that, he's plotting something." I nodded, though my smile was tight. I couldn't let paranoia make me look weak. I had to appear calm, in control, confident, even if inside, my chest felt like a jackhammer. The final hour before the presentation was a blur of mental rehearsals and last-minute tweaks. I caught Daniel leaning against the conference room door, pretending to review emails, but I swear he was watching me. My palms were sweating, but I refused to let it show. I reminded myself why I was here. I wasn't just going to survive this presentation, I was going to own it. As I set up the laptop in the conference room, checking the projector and running through slides one last time, I felt that rush. The one that comes when the stakes are sky high, when every move could make or break you. Daniel hovered nearby, pretending to be helpful but with that ever-present edge of judgment. "Break a leg," he said with that polished grin, and I knew, without a doubt, he wasn't wishing me luck. He was predicting failure. But here's the thing about people who underestimate you. They rarely anticipate how far you're willing to go to protect your own career. I took a deep breath, straightened my notes, and whispered to myself, "Not today, Daniel. Today, you're going to see exactly what I'm capable of." And just like that, the stage was set. The trap was ready, but I didn't know yet whether Daniel's subtle sabotage would be my undoing, or the very thing that would expose him later. Either way, I wasn't going down without a fight. The morning of the presentation arrived like a storm I could feel in my bones. I walked into the office, coffee in one hand, laptop bag in the other, trying to breathe normally, trying not to let the butterflies in my stomach turn into full-blown panic. But of course, my manager Daniel was already there, leaning against the cubicle wall with that same infuriatingly calm grin, perfectly starched shirt, and shoes that looked like they were made of polished glass. "Morning," he said, giving me a cheerful nod. "Big day today. Hope you're ready." I nodded back, forcing a smile that I hoped looked natural. Ready? I was ready in the sense that I had memorized every slide, triple-checked every number, and rehearsed my speech so many times that my reflection in the mirror probably knew it better than I did. But with Daniel in the office, ready didn't mean safe. I set up my laptop in the conference room an hour before the client call. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee, the kind of smell that reminds you that real adults pay bills and deal with deadlines while the world sleeps. I opened my presentation and froze. Slides were missing, or rather, some slides had changed order. Charts were swapped, and a few numbers didn't match what I had meticulously prepared. My brain went into overdrive. I turned around just in time to see Daniel walking by, pretending to stretch. "Everything okay?" he asked with that casual smile that I wanted to punch. "Yeah, just something's off with the slides," I muttered, trying not to panic. "I'll fix it." Sure, he said, almost too quickly before moving on. I clenched my fists. I knew he had done something. This was sabotage, not obvious sabotage, not something you could prove in a casual glance, but enough to throw me off. Enough to make me look flustered in front of clients. I took a deep breath and decided to improvise. I quickly scanned the slides, noted the changes, and formulated a backup plan in my head. If he thought he could rattle me, he was about to get a surprise. When the clients joined the call, I opened with a confident, "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today, I'll walk you through our proposal and highlight the key strategies for your upcoming campaign." My voice sounded steady, even though my heart was hammering, and then the chaos began. The first slide didn't load correctly, and I had to improvise. No problem. I knew the content. I described the missing chart verbally, filling in every detail so convincingly that I swear some clients nodded like they could see it anyway. Then, the next slide had the wrong data. My mouth went dry, my fingers hovered over the mouse, but I remembered every single statistic from memory. I presented it like I was reading from the slides themselves. Daniel was there, of course, watching, smiling, occasionally whispering something to one of the other managers like a spectator at a tennis match. I could feel whispers from my colleagues in the corner of the room. I caught Jenna's eye and she gave me the tiniest nod, a silent, "You've got this," the only thing keeping me from panicking. By the time we reached the halfway point, Daniel had already sent an email to the client with updated figures. Totally false, designed to make me look bad. But I had anticipated it. I had prepared alternative scenarios for each potential hiccup. When the client questioned the discrepancy, I explained calmly that the numbers had been updated based on real-time analytics and provided the reasoning behind each change. I could feel their confidence returning. I could see some of them jotting down notes, nodding along, trusting me again. Daniel's face was priceless. For a second, I thought he might actually throw a subtle tantrum, but he held it together. That grin remained, but the gleam in his eye faltered just a fraction. As the presentation continued, more problems popped up. Slides that weren't supposed to be there, missing charts, headers that didn't match the content. Each time, I improvised, explained, and turned the issue into an advantage. "Actually, this slide shows exactly why our proposed strategy will save you time and money compared to the previous approach," I said at one point, pointing to a mismatched chart and spinning it into a success story. By the end of the presentation, I was drenched in sweat, shaking slightly, but I had done it. The clients were impressed. Notes were being taken. Questions were being answered with authority and insight. I could feel my reputation, my credibility, slowly rebuilding itself with each passing minute. Daniel leaned back in his chair as the final slide appeared, applauding politely. "Well done," he said, voice smooth as silk. "Very impressive." I forced a smile, nodding, though inside I wanted to scream, "I know what you did." Later, as the meeting ended, I overheard one of the client representatives murmuring to another, "Wow, even with those hiccups, they handled it perfectly." I couldn't help but grin. Hiccups indeed. Daniel had tried to set me up for failure, and yet here I was, standing tall. When the clients left, I returned to my desk and found Jenna waiting. "You saw what he was doing, right?" she whispered. I nodded. "I did, but you handled it perfectly. Honestly, that was brilliant." The adrenaline from surviving the presentation didn't fade immediately. Every click of the mouse, every ping of an email, every glance at my inbox felt like a small battle won. And yet, deep down, I knew Daniel wasn't done. He wouldn't be. Not after this. I started reviewing the files he had updated, cross-checking emails and timelines. There were little things. Timestamps that didn't match, files that had been modified just minutes before the presentation. I made mental notes, Every detail mattered, every piece of evidence counted. By the end of the day, I had survived Daniel's sabotage. I had improvised, adapted, and won the client's trust despite the chaos he had orchestrated. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Daniel was clever, patient, and manipulative. He wouldn't let a single defeat go unnoticed. I sat back in my chair, exhausted but satisfied, and whispered to myself, "You think this is the end? No, Daniel. It's just the start." The morning after the presentation, the office felt quieter than usual, almost like it had collectively held its breath overnight. I arrived at my desk, coffee in hand, still buzzing from yesterday's adrenaline. My body ached in ways I didn't realize until I sat down, but my mind was wide awake. The clients had been impressed. The executives had complimented the presentation. My inbox was flooded with praise. And yet I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the real victory was far from over. Daniel, of course, was already there, acting as though nothing had happened. He smiled, checked his emails, and gave a casual nod in my direction. "Well, looks like you survived," he said. His tone was playful, almost teasing, like a cat toying with a mouse. I forced a tight-lipped smile. "Yeah, survived," I replied, and for the first time, I let myself watch him carefully. I could tell he was convinced he had played it cleverly. That smug confidence would be his downfall. I just had to document it. I spent the first part of the morning reviewing the presentation files. As I suspected, there were discrepancies. Modified timestamps, slides replaced last minute, and emails sent to clients with slightly altered numbers. Every tiny change was a breadcrumb trail. I copied, cataloged, and stored them safely. This was my ammunition. Daniel thought he was invisible. He wasn't. Not anymore. I knew I couldn't act rashly. Going straight to HR or the executives without proof would make me look paranoid, not clever. I needed evidence. Hard evidence that would expose his sabotage while keeping me protected. So I started reaching out subtly. I pinged coworkers one by one in private messages, casually asking if they had noticed any anomalies in the presentation files or last-minute updates. Some responded cautiously, vague enough not to implicate themselves, but giving me hints. Others, like Jenna, were more direct. "Yeah, something felt off," she admitted. "He was hovering over you all day yesterday, pretending to help, but I don't trust him." Her confirmation felt like a warm flashlight beam in a dark tunnel. I wasn't imagining it. Daniel had been meddling, manipulating, and trying to take credit, or worse, shift blame. Over the next couple of days, I became part detective, part analyst. I cross-referenced emails, file modification logs, and chat transcripts. Patterns started to emerge. Every time a file discrepancy occurred, Daniel had been in proximity. Every misdirected client email had originated from his computer or account. I even discovered that one colleague had received a subtly altered version of a key report, which could have caused confusion if it had reached the client. It was meticulous work, tedious, but satisfying. Every little proof I gathered felt like laying another brick in the foundation of the eventual trap I was planning. Office politics, of course, made things more complicated. Some coworkers were hesitant to get involved. Mark from accounting, for instance, kept glancing at me like he was worried he'd be dragged into a scandal. Others, like Jenna and Priya from marketing, quietly offered support. Emails here, subtle confirmation there. Toxic colleagues whispered in corners, speculating that I was paranoid or overreacting, but I let them talk. Gossip was noise. Evidence was power. By the end of the week, I had compiled a detailed log of every instance where Daniel had interfered with my presentation. Every suspicious email, every altered file, every misleading comment, all timestamped and categorized. It was beautiful in its clarity. I could see the full picture now. Daniel had tried to sabotage me at every step, thinking he was invisible, thinking no one noticed. And yet, he continued acting as though he had the upper hand. He strutted through the office, checking on teams, offering advice, and making casual remarks about the presentation. It was like watching a magician boast after a trick, not realizing the audience had already figured it out. I smiled to myself one afternoon, scrolling through the latest batch of emails. He had sent another message to a client that subtly contradicted one of my points, but I had already anticipated this move. I drafted a careful response, documenting the error without directly accusing him, and sent it to the client with a polite, professional tone. The client replied, grateful for the clarification. Daniel didn't know yet that his little trick had been neutralized and recorded. The psychological tension was exquisite. Every interaction with him became a chess match. I smiled, nodded, and acted cooperative, while inside I was quietly building my strategy. My mind raced with possibilities for a controlled, precise trap that would expose his manipulations publicly without giving him the chance to blame me. By the end of the week, I had my plan forming like a blueprint. I wouldn't rush. I wouldn't act impulsively. Timing was everything. I had the evidence, I had the allies, and I had the foresight to stay under the radar while Daniel continued his little performances. He was walking into his own trap, completely unaware. Late Friday afternoon, I sat back at my desk, exhausted but exhilarated. The week had been a whirlwind of tension, investigation, and subtle maneuvering. I looked at the neatly organized folders of proof on my computer and whispered to myself, soon, Daniel, soon, everyone will see exactly what you've been up to. And for the first time, the office didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a stage, and I was about to take center stage. The week after the presentation was tense, but in a quiet, simmering way. Daniel had reverted to his usual act, the polished, overly confident manager who made it look like he was always 3 steps ahead. But I knew better. I had the evidence, the witnesses, and the plan. All I needed now was the perfect opportunity to let it unfold. I spent Monday morning mapping it all out. Every email he sent, every file he touched, every sly comment in meetings. I documented it all in meticulous detail, but documentation alone wouldn't be enough. Daniel thrived on appearances. He was good at keeping the facade polished, at pretending to be helpful and charming in front of executives. If I wanted to expose him, I'd have to do it in a way that couldn't be ignored, in a way that left no room for him to twist the narrative. The plan started simple. I created a fake data set, nothing harmful, nothing catastrophic, but believable enough that a client would take it seriously. I called it Project Orion. I planted subtle inconsistencies in the data, the kind only someone familiar with internal numbers could spot, someone like Daniel. Then I let it sit just enough for him to notice it and take the bait. It didn't take long. By Tuesday morning, he had already emailed me in a casual tone. I noticed a few numbers in Project Orion that don't seem right. Did you double check these? Could be an issue if the client sees them. I smiled as I read it. Perfect. Just as predicted. He had taken the bait thinking he was being helpful, that he was subtly undermining me again. Little did he know every move he made was being tracked, every email being saved. I had coworkers on standby to witness any tampering. Meanwhile, I continued my regular work, pretending everything was business as usual. I smiled, nodded, and acted cooperative while secretly monitoring him. Small victories started piling up. Colleagues whispered to me about inconsistencies they noticed in his instructions. One day, Mark from accounting casually mentioned, "Hey, wasn't Daniel's report different from the last numbers? Seemed odd." Jenna confirmed the next day. "Yeah, I noticed that too. I thought I was imagining it." The arrogance in Daniel was palpable. He had no idea we were onto him. He assumed his charm and manipulations were invisible, that everyone would keep quiet out of fear or politeness. But the more he acted, the more obvious he became. Every slight misdirection, every half-truth, every condescending comment he dropped in meetings, all of it added to the pattern I was building. By midweek, I was ready for the next phase, the trap itself. I scheduled a fake client call, convincing Daniel that he would lead a portion of the discussion. I told him I'd be providing supporting data and coordinating the presentation. Naturally, he was eager to take charge, thinking he could swoop in and impress the clients while subtly throwing me off. The day of the call arrived and I set the scene perfectly. The fake data set was in place, the manipulated slides ready, and key witnesses positioned in the virtual meeting to observe his interactions. I logged every movement, every word. Daniel started the call confidently, explaining the numbers with that overconfident tone he always used. He praised himself repeatedly, referring to minor successes as if they were entirely his doing. Then I triggered the trap. I asked a carefully worded question about one of the discrepancies in the data set, one that only he could have noticed and acted upon. Daniel's smile faltered. He stammered, glanced at his notes, and tried to redirect the question, but it was too late. I calmly explained the origin of the dataset, the subtle inconsistencies, and pointed out the specific emails where he had helpfully tried to correct it. The silence was deafening. Daniel's face turned pale as realization hit him. I could see the panic in his eyes as the client representatives started questioning the discrepancies, not at me, but at him. Every lie, every subtle manipulation he had attempted was now exposed in front of the clients and executives. The icing on the cake was the witnesses. Jenna and Priya had been subtly documenting his movements, noting how he had tried to redirect blame, how he had sent misleading emails. When I called their attention to these observations, they confirmed it openly, without hesitation. It was like watching a house of cards collapse. Daniel tried to recover, stammering through excuses, but his arrogance had trapped him. Every word he spoke only made the evidence clearer. The executives exchanged glances, the clients nodded in quiet acknowledgement, and I felt a rush of satisfaction so intense it was almost intoxicating. After the call ended, I returned to my desk, heart still racing, adrenaline pumping. I glanced at Daniel, who slumped in his chair, defeated but too proud to fully admit it. He hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for it, and now he couldn't salvage his reputation. Not without digging an even deeper hole for himself. I leaned back in my chair and smiled quietly. This was more than just revenge. It was justice. The trap had worked flawlessly. Every piece of evidence, every subtle maneuver, every small victory had led to this moment. And the best part, I hadn't even had to confront him directly. The exposure had done the work for me. By the end of the day, the office atmosphere had shifted. Colleagues who were previously hesitant started acknowledging the inconsistencies they had noticed, reinforcing the narrative that Daniel's manipulations were no longer hidden. Even Mark, who had been wary, offered a quiet, approving nod as I walked past. I knew this was only the beginning. The trap had sprung, Yes, but Daniel was still in the office, still a potential threat. His ego had been bruised, his overconfidence shattered, but he wasn't out of moves yet. That meant I had to remain vigilant, prepared for whatever petty retaliation he might attempt next. As I packed up my things that evening, I felt a sense of quiet triumph. The presentation sabotage, the manipulations, the constant undermining, they had all backfired spectacularly. I had turned every trick he tried to use against me into proof, every subtle maneuver into ammunition. I walked out of the office, shoulders straight, heart steady, and whispered to myself, "This is only the start, Daniel. You think you've lost? Just wait. The real game begins now." And with that, the stage was perfectly set for the final act, where all the pieces would come together and Daniel's empire of deception would face its ultimate reckoning. The morning after the trap, the office felt different, charged, almost electric. You could tell something had shifted, not just in the air, but in the way people walked past Daniel's cubicle. He tried to keep his composure, but there was a tension to his posture I hadn't seen before. A subtle twitch in his shoulder, the way his fingers drummed nervously against the desk. For once, the ever-confident, perfectly polished Daniel looked human, vulnerable. I arrived early. Like always, coffee in hand, feeling a calm that was almost surreal. I didn't need to check emails obsessively this time. I already knew what was coming. The executives had reviewed the data, the clients had weighed in, and the subtle but damning inconsistencies we documented were impossible to ignore. Every manipulated email, every altered file, every misdirection Daniel had tried to get away with was now part of a clear, undeniable pattern. By mid-morning, the HR director called him into a meeting. You could practically hear the whispers rippling through the office. He left with that forced smile, trying to appear unfazed, but I noticed his hands shaking just slightly. And that was my first real victory, seeing him caught, not through confrontation, but by the system he thought he had outsmarted. Meanwhile, the executives called me into a private meeting. My stomach churned for a moment. Was this another trick? Another layer of office politics? But when I stepped into the room, it was all smiles and congratulations. "Your presentation," one of the senior directors said, leaning back in his chair, "was impeccable. You handled unexpected discrepancies brilliantly and maintained the client's confidence throughout. We've noticed the extra effort and initiative you took. Outstanding work." I felt a rush of pride, a kind of warmth that came from knowing you'd faced a storm and not just survived, but thrived. I thanked them, keeping my tone professional, but inside, I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. Daniel's interference had not only failed, it had highlighted exactly why I deserved recognition. Word spread quickly. Colleagues approached me, some hesitant, some genuinely impressed. I knew something was off with Daniel's instructions, Jenna admitted, shaking her head. "I'm glad you figured it out." Priya, always careful with her words, added, "Honestly, I was worried you'd get blamed, but you handled it like a pro." Even Mark, the quiet one from accounting, gave me a subtle nod, muttering, "You played that perfectly." It felt incredible. I wasn't just surviving office politics anymore, I was thriving in it. As for Daniel, well, the consequences unfolded in a way that was satisfying beyond words. By Friday, the official reprimand arrived, a formal demotion, a permanent mark in his HR file, and an immediate loss of client-facing responsibilities. His credibility, carefully crafted over years, had eroded in just a few days. Every attempt he had made to appear indispensable now seemed laughably futile. He tried, of course. Daniel couldn't resist one last sneaky move, a whispered comment in the hallway, a half-hearted attempt to discredit me in a casual meeting. But I was prepared. Every potential manipulation had been anticipated and countered. He walked right into the trap one final time. And this time, it wasn't subtle. It was undeniable. Executives overheard, colleagues confirmed, and even the clients noticed. He left the office that day looking defeated, a far cry from the untouchable figure he had once been. For me, it was not just revenge. It was affirmation. I reflected on the entire experience, and I realized something important about office politics. It's never just about intelligence or hard work. It's about awareness, timing, and the ability to anticipate people's moves. Daniel underestimated me at every step, and that was his mistake. He assumed that charm and subtle manipulation would always be enough to keep him on top, but he hadn't accounted for preparation, persistence, or principle. I allowed myself a quiet laugh as I sat at my desk, sipping coffee. It had been exhausting, stressful, and at times nerve-wracking, but it had also been empowering. I had taken control of a situation designed to break me and turned it into a career-defining moment. By the end of the week, my recognition was official. The executives publicly praised my handling of the presentation, I received a promotion, and I was entrusted with leading more high-profile projects. The confidence boost was exhilarating, but more than that, it gave me perspective. I wasn't just capable of surviving manipulation, I was capable of outsmarting it entirely. And as for Daniel, well, he lingered in the office like a shadow of his former self, but even that had its own subtle satisfaction. Watching him struggle with the fallout, watching his overconfidence crumble, it was a reminder of the power of patience, evidence, and quiet, calculated strategy. In the end, I learned something crucial. Revenge isn't about impulsive anger or petty sabotage. It's about careful observation, timing, and turning someone's own weaknesses into their undoing. Daniel had tried to sabotage me, thinking he could stay invisible while doing it. But I had anticipated every move, documented every action, and executed a flawless response that not only protected me, but elevated me. Walking out of the office that Friday evening, I felt lighter than I had in months. I knew the office battlefield would never disappear. There would always be manipulations, power plays, and subtle games. But I also knew I had the tools to navigate them with confidence. I was smarter, stronger, and more prepared than ever. I paused at the door, taking one last look at the office. A small smile crossed my face. "Game over, Daniel," I whispered, and for once, I knew it was true. Victory had never tasted sweeter. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.